She slipped a napkin to the mafia boss. "My ex is here. Please don't let him hurt me tonight." The bass line at Club Nebula was heavy enough to rattle the fillings in Lena Carter's teeth. It was a Friday night in Harborview, and the city's premier nightlife destination was operating at maximum capacity. Bodies writhed under the strobe lights, a sea of sweat and glitter moving in time to the electronic beat. Behind the main bar, Lena moved with the mechanical efficiency of someone who had done this 1,000 times. She poured shots of tequila, popped caps off beer bottles, and mixed cocktails with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. Beneath the surface of her professional demeanor, a cold current of anxiety churned. It had been 3 weeks since the divorce was finalized, and 2 weeks since the judge signed the restraining order against Eric Hale. The piece of paper was folded into a tight square in her purse, tucked away in the staff locker room, but its legal weight felt flimsy against the reality of her ex-husband's temper. Every time the heavy double doors at the entrance swung open to admit new guests, Lena felt a spike of adrenaline, her gaze darting toward the shadows before she forced herself to focus back on the customers. She was wiping down the mahogany counter when the atmosphere in the club shifted subtly. The change did not come from the music or the lights, but from a ripple of hushed deference that moved through the crowd near the VIP entrance. Lena looked up. Brushing a stray lock of dark hair from her forehead, a group of 4 men walked through the parted crowd. They were dressed in sharp, tailored suits that cost more than Lena made in a year, a stark contrast to the casual club wear surrounding them. At the center of the formation walked a man who seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. He was tall, with broad shoulders that strained the fabric of his charcoal jacket, and he moved with a fluid, predatory grace. "That is Damien Viscari," the bartender beside her whispered, leaning in close so only Lena could hear. Lena knew the name. Everyone in Harborview knew the name. Damien Viscari was technically a legitimate businessman, the owner of a shipping logistics empire and half the commercial real estate on the waterfront. But the whispers that trailed him spoke of a different kind of power, one rooted in the shadowed history of the city's underworld. He was the head of the Viscari crime family, a man whose silence was rumored to be more dangerous than a loaded gun. She watched as he was ushered into the raised VIP section overlooking the dance floor. He sat on the center leather sofa, his posture relaxed, but his dark eyes scanning the room with the intensity of a hawk watching a field. He did not look like he was there to party. He looked like he was holding court. Lena turned back to her work, trying to shake off the unease. She reached for a clean highball glass, her mind drifting back to her own safety. Just as she turned toward the well to scoop ice, her eyes swept across the main entrance again. Her heart stopped. Eric was walking through the door. He was not alone. He was flanked by 2 of his friends from the gym, men who had laughed along with his cruel jokes for years. Eric wore a leather jacket and a smile that Lena knew all too well. It was the smile he wore right before he started screaming. It was a predatory, self-satisfied smirk that said he owned the room and everything in it. The glass slipped from Lena's trembling fingers. It hit the floor mats with a wet, shattering crash that was audible even over the music. Shards of glass sprayed against her ankles. Lena froze. Her breath caught in her throat, her hands shaking so violently she had to grip the edge of the bar to stay upright. Up in the VIP section, Damien Viscari shifted his gaze. The sound of the breaking glass had cut through the noise, drawing his attention to the bar. He saw the young woman with the pale face and the terrified eyes. He saw the way she was gripping the wood, her knuckles white. And then he followed her line of sight to the man in the leather jacket standing near the entrance. Damien did not move, but his eyes narrowed slightly. Lena scrambled to clean up the glass, her pulse roaring in her ears like a freight train. She prayed Eric would not see her. She prayed he would turn around and leave, but Eric Hale never left when he had an audience. He scanned the room, and it only took him 10 seconds to lock eyes with her. His smile widened. Lena felt the blood drain from her face. She tried to busy herself with a customer, but Eric was already moving. He cut through the crowd with an arrogant stride, his friends trailing behind him like hyenas. He reached the bar and leaned over the counter. invading her personal space. "Well, hello there." "Lena," Eric said, his voice dripping with a fake sweetness that made her stomach turn. "You look surprised to see me." Lena took a step back, her back hitting the liquor shelves. "Eric, you cannot be here. I have a restraining order. You are not allowed within 500 feet of me." Eric laughed, a harsh barking sound. He reached for the bowl of peanuts on the bar, popping one into his mouth. "A piece of paper is not going to keep me away from my wife." "Lena." "Ex-wife," she corrected, her voice trembling. "Technicalities," Eric dismissed, waving a hand. "I know you finish your shift at 2 in the morning. I know you take the bus to 4th Street. You cannot hide from me." "Lena, we have unfinished business." The threat was veiled, but clear. He was telling her that he was watching her, that he knew her routines, that she was not safe, no matter what the law said. "Please leave," Lena whispered, looking around for the bouncers, but they were busy breaking up a scuffle on the other side of the room. "I am just having a drink," Eric said, his eyes hard and cold. "Get me a whiskey, and make it a double." He turned his back to her, leaning against the bar to talk to his friends, effectively trapping her. He was not leaving. He was going to wait until her shift was over. He was going to wait until she was outside in the dark. Panic clawed at Lena's throat. She could not call the police without him seeing. If she picked up her phone, he would escalate. She needed help, and she needed it immediately. Her eyes darted around the room and landed on the VIP section. Damien Vascari was sitting less than 20 feet away, just behind the velvet rope. He was watching the bar, watching her. An idea, desperate and terrified, formed in her mind. Lena grabbed a cocktail napkin. Her hand shook so hard she could barely hold the pen. She hunched over the counter, shielding her actions with her body so Eric would not see. She wrote quickly, the letters jagged and uneven. "My ex is here. Please don't let him hurt me tonight." She crumpled the napkin into her palm. She grabbed a tray of fresh drinks intended for a table near the VIP section. Taking a deep breath, she walked out from behind the bar. Eric did not notice her leave. He was too busy laughing at something his friend said. Lena moved quickly through the crowd. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She approached the VIP section. The security guard stepped aside, recognizing her uniform. She walked up to the low table in front of Damien Vascari. She set the drinks down for his associates. Then, as she turned to leave, she locked eyes with Damien for a split second. His eyes were dark, intelligent, and unreadable. She opened her hand and let the napkin flutter down onto the table directly in front of him. "Please," she mouthed, the word barely a breath. Then she hurried back toward the bar, terrified that Eric would realize she was gone. Damien Vascari looked down at the white square of paper. He picked it up with long, steady fingers. He read the message once. His expression did not change. There was no flicker of surprise, no frown of concern. There was only a deepening of the stillness that surrounded him. He looked up and located Lena, who was now back behind the bar, looking pale and small. Then he looked at the man in the leather jacket who was leaning against her station, effectively blocking her exit. Damien leaned slightly to his right. Marco, his second in command, leaned in immediately. "That man at the bar," Damien said, his voice low and devoid of emotion. "The one in the leather jacket. Pull the security feeds. I want a name and a background check within 3 minutes, and keep eyes on him." Marco nodded once and pulled out his phone. Tapping the screen rapidly, Damien sat back, crossing one leg over the other. He did not look away from Eric. He watched the way Eric's body language dominated the space, the way he kept glancing back at Lena with a sneer. Damien had seen men like this before, small men who felt big when they frightened women. He waited. Down at the bar, Eric turned back to Lena. "Where is my drink?" he demanded, snapping his fingers. "I am not serving you," Lena said, finding a shred of courage. "You need to leave." Eric's face darkened. The fake friendliness evaporated. He reached over the bar, his hand shooting out to grab her wrist. "Do not speak to me like that," he hissed. "You think you are special because you work in a club like this? You are nothing without me." "Let go of me," Lena cried out, trying to wrench her arm away. Eric pulled harder, dragging her toward the end of the bar where the shadows were deeper. "We are going to have a little talk," he growled. "Over in the corner. Now." Lena dug her heels in, but he was stronger. Panic exploded in her chest. "No, stop!" Before Eric could pull her out from behind the bar, a hand descended on the counter. It was not a violent strike, but the sound of the heavy gold signet ring hitting the wood was sharp enough to cut through the tension. Eric froze. He looked up. Damien Vascari was standing there, up close. He was even larger than he appeared from a distance. He radiated a cold, suffocating authority. He was not looking at Eric. He was looking at Lena. "Is everything all right here, sweetheart?" Damien asked. His voice was smooth, deep, and perfectly calm. Eric blinked, confused. He looked from Damien to Lena. "Who are you?" Damien finally turned his gaze to Eric. The air temperature between them seemed to drop 10 degrees. He smiled, but it was a smile that promised violence. "I am her boyfriend. Damien lied, and I am waiting for you to let go of her wrist." The silence that followed was heavy. Eric's friends stepped closer, posturing, but Marco and 2 other Vascari security men materialized behind Damien, their arms crossed, their expressions grim. Eric released Lena's wrist as if it had burned him. He took a step back, sizing Damien up. He saw the expensive suit, the ring, the men standing behind him. Eric was a bully, but he was not stupid. He knew when he was outmatched. "Boyfriend?" Eric scoffed, though his voice wavered slightly. "Since when?" "Since tonight," Damien said softly. "Now, I suggest you return to your friends and enjoy the evening elsewhere. Lena is working, and I do not like it when people distract her." Eric's jaw tightened. He glared at Lena, his face twisting with humiliation and rage. "You think you have moved up in the world, huh?" He sneered at her. "You think this guy is going to save you?" Damien took a half step forward. It was a subtle movement, but it was enough. "Go," he said. Eric held his ground for 1 second longer, trying to salvage his pride. Then he scoffed, turned, and signaled to his friends. As he walked away, he passed close to where Lena stood paralyzed behind the bar. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper that only she could hear. "I will see you outside later. Lena, this is not over." He pulled back and walked out of the club, his shoulders rigid. Lena stood frozen, her chest heaving. The threat hung in the air like poison gas. He was going to wait. He was going to hurt her. The restraining order meant nothing. She felt a hand touch the small of her back. She jumped, gasping. "It is me," Damien said gently. He guided her out from behind the bar, signaling to the manager that she was taking a break. He led her not toward the crowded floor, but into a quiet staff corridor lined with crates of liquor and cleaning supplies. The noise of the club faded to a dull thrum through the heavy walls. Damien turned to face her. The cold, dangerous mask he had worn for Eric was gone. His expression was serious, but his eyes were searching hers with concern. "Are you hurt?" he asked. Lena shook her head, wrapping her arms around herself to stop the shaking. "No, I am fine. Thank you. Oh my God, thank you. I did not know what to do." He reached out, hesitating for a moment before placing a hand on her shoulder to steady her. He whispered that he would see you outside. "Didn't he?" Lena looked up, surprised that he had noticed. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes. "Yes, he is my ex-husband. He's been stalking me. I have a restraining order, but he does not care. He gets violent when he drinks." Damien listened, his gaze never leaving her face. He did not interrupt. He did not tell her to calm down. He simply stood there, a solid wall between her and the world, absorbing her fear. "What did he do to you?" Damien asked quietly. It was not a demand for gossip. It was a question asked by a man assessing a threat. Lena swallowed hard. The memories threatened to choke her. He controlled everything, my money, my friends, and when I tried to leave, She trailed off, unable to say the words, but she touched her ribs unconsciously. Damien's jaw tightened, a muscle feathered in his cheek. That was the only sign of his anger. "He is not going to touch you again," Damien said. His voice had the weight of a vow. "He's waiting outside," Lena whispered, a tear finally escaping and tracking down her cheek. He knows where I live. Damien reached into his pocket and pulled out a handkerchief. He handed it to her. You are not going home yet, he said. And you are not going back to that bar. Lena wiped her eyes. I have to finish my shift. I need the money. I will cover your wages, Damien said dismissively. Tonight, you are my guest. He placed his hand on the small of her back again, the warmth of his palm seeping through her uniform shirt. It was a gesture of protection, firm and reassuring. Come with me to the VIP section, he said. My men are at the doors. He cannot get near you there. You can sit with me until the club closes. Then I will make sure you get home safely. Lena looked at him. She knew who he was. She knew he was a dangerous man, a man who lived in a world of violence and crime. But looking into his dark eyes, she saw something she had not seen in years. She saw safety. Okay, she breathed. Damien nodded and guided her back out of the corridor. He walked slightly in front of her, shielding her from the crowd, clearing a path just by existing. When they reached the VIP area, he did not banish her to a corner. He led her to the leather sofa where he had been sitting. He sat down and gestured for her to sit beside him. Lena sat. She was close enough to smell his cologne, sandalwood and something crisp like winter air. She was close enough that when he shifted to hand her a glass of water, his shoulder brushed against hers. She flinched instinctively, but Damien did not pull away. He let his shoulder rest there, a steady point of contact. He turned his body slightly toward her, creating a physical barrier between her and the rest of the room. Drink, he said softly. You are in shock. Lena took a sip of the water. Her hands were still trembling, but the shaking was beginning to subside. She looked at his profile. He was watching the room again, his vigilance returning, but he was acutely aware of her presence. Their knees were nearly touching. In the dim light of the club, amidst the chaos of the party, a strange bubble of silence formed around them. Lena felt a profound sense of relief wash over her, followed by a spark of something else, something warm and terrifyingly magnetic. She looked at the napkin that was still sitting on the table in front of him, her desperate plea, and the man who had answered it. Thank you, she whispered again. Damien turned to look at her. His eyes dropped to her lips for a fraction of a second before meeting her gaze. You do not need to thank me, Lena, he said, his voice low and rough. No one hurts what is mine. He paused, as if realizing what he had said, but he did not correct himself. He simply held her gaze, and for the first time that night, Lena did not feel like a victim. She felt seen, and she felt safe. Sunlight filtered through the thin, yellowed curtains of Lena's studio apartment, casting long stripes across the worn duvet. Lena Carter lay still, staring at the ceiling, the silence of the morning pressing against her ears. Usually, her first thought upon waking was a mental checklist of bills to pay or shifts to pick up. Today, however, her mind was occupied by a single, dominating image, Damien Vascari. She closed her eyes and could almost feel the phantom weight of his hand on her lower back. It was a sensation that was both comforting and deeply unsettling. She had spent years conditioning herself to flinch at a man's touch, expecting pain or a rough, possessive grip. But Damien had touched her as if she were something rare and fragile, something to be guarded rather than owned. It was dangerous to think this way. She knew who he was. The staff at Club Nebula whispered about bodies buried in the foundations of the new waterfront condos and shipments that bypassed customs in the dead of night. He was a criminal. It was violence wrapped in a tailored suit. And yet, when he had looked at Eric, Lena had not felt fear of Damien. She had felt fear for anyone who dared to cross him. The vibration of her phone on the bedside table shattered the moment. The buzzing sound against the cheap laminate wood was like a drill in the quiet room. Lena rolled over, her stomach tightening into a familiar knot. She picked up the device. 7 new messages, 3 missed calls, all from Eric. She unlocked the screen, her thumb hovering over the messages. She did not want to read them, but her lawyer had been clear. Documentation was survival. Come on, Lena, pick up the phone. I'm sorry about last night, baby. I just miss you. Who was that guy? You think you can replace me? You are pathetic. I just want to talk. Pick up or I am coming over there. You are dead to me." The messages swung wildly between desperate pleading and vitriolic rage, a pendulum of instability that Lena knew all too well. Her hands shook slightly as she took screenshots of each text, saving them into a hidden folder labeled taxes to keep it inconspicuous. It felt empowering to have the evidence, to know that every threat he typed was another nail in his legal coffin. But it was also terrifying. The restraining order was a shield made of paper, and Eric was a man who liked to play with matches. Across the city, in a high-rise office with a panoramic view of the harbor, Damien Vascari was looking at a different kind of screen. The office was stark and modern, dominated by glass and steel. Damien sat behind a massive desk, his suit jacket draped over the back of his chair, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal muscular forearms. He was watching the security footage from Club Nebula on a tablet. He watched the grainy video of Eric Hale grabbing Lena's wrist. He watched the fear in her body language, the way she shrank into herself. Damien paused the video on Eric's face. "Who is he?" Damien asked, his voice low. Marco, standing by the window, flipped open a file folder. Eric Hale, 32 years old, works sporadic construction jobs, dishonorable discharge from the military for conduct unbecoming. He has a rap sheet 2 miles long, mostly drunk and disorderly, bar fights, and 3 domestic disturbance calls in the last 2 years filed by neighbors. Damien's eyes remained cold. "Is that all?" Marco hesitated. "There is one more thing. He has been seen moving product for a low-level dealer in the warehouse district. The dealer kicks up to the Rojas syndicate." Damien finally looked up from the tablet. The Rojas. It was a complication. The Rojas syndicate was a rival faction, messy and undisciplined, constantly trying to encroach on Vascari territory. If Eric was connected to them, even loosely, this was no longer just a personal matter of protecting a woman. It was a potential vulnerability. If the Rojas found out that Damien Vascari had a soft spot for the ex-wife of one of their runners, they would use Eric as a pawn to get to him. Damien stood up, walking to the window to look out at the gray water of the bay. "He's a loose end," Damien said, "and loose ends get pulled. I can have a conversation with him," Marco suggested, his tone implying that the conversation would involve very few words and a lot of pain. "Not yet," Damien said. "If he disappears, the Rojas might start asking questions. We need to know how deep he is in with them. And I need to make sure Lena understands the reality of the situation." He turned back to the room, grabbing his jacket. "I am going to the club tonight," Damien announced. Marco frowned. "It is a Tuesday. It will be dead." "Exactly," Damien said. When Lena arrived for her shift that evening, the club was indeed quiet. Only a few regulars nursed drinks at the tables, and the music was kept to a low, ambient thrum. It was a relief after the chaos of Friday. She felt safer when the room was empty, when she could see every corner. She was wiping down the taps when the heavy oak doors opened. She did not need to look up to know who it was. The air in the room seemed to shift, charging with a sudden electricity. Damien walked directly to the bar. He was not with an entourage tonight. It was just him. He took a seat on a stool right in front of her station. "Good evening." "Lena," he said. His voice was like a physical caress, deep and smooth. Lena felt a flush rise to her cheeks. She set down a rag, trying to steady her hands. "Mr. Vascari," she said, "I did not expect to see you on a Tuesday." "Damien," he corrected gently, "and I am here to work. I need to ask you some questions." The shift in his tone was subtle but distinct. He was not flirting. He was focused. Lena nodded, pouring him a sparkling water with a twist of lime, remembering his order from the previous week. "Ask," she said. Damien leaned forward, his forearms resting on the bar. He lowered his voice so that the other bartender at the far end could not hear. "Does Eric own a gun?" Lena blinked, the question catching her off guard. I do not think so. He used to talk about getting one, but I never saw one in the apartment. Does he have friends who carry?" Damien pressed. Lena thought for a moment. "There is a guy named Sal, and another one they call T-Bone. They are always bragging about what they carry in their trucks. Damien nodded, as if confirming something he already knew. Has Eric ever mentioned the name Rojas or Miguel? Lena frowned, scrubbing a spot on the counter. Once or twice. He said he had some new friends who were going to help him make real money. He said they were heavy hitters. Why? Damien did not answer immediately. He took a sip of his water, his dark eyes analyzing her face. Because men like Eric are weak, Lena, and weak men look for power wherever they can find it. If he thinks he can use these people to get to you, or to get back at me for Friday night, he will... A chill ran down Lena's spine. You think he would try to hurt you? Damien's mouth quirked in a humorless smile. I am not worried about myself. I am worried about what happens when an unstoppable force meets a very stupid object. I want you to be careful. If you see anything at all, you call Marco. You have the number? She nodded, patting her pocket where the card Marco had given her sat. Good, Damien said. He finished his water and stood up. I will be in the office for an hour. Marco is outside. Later that night, as Lena was clocking out, she felt a strange sense of unease. The club was closing, and the street outside was dark. She pushed open the heavy back door that led to the alley where the staff parked, her keys laced between her fingers, a habit born of necessity. She stopped dead. A black sedan was idling at the end of the alley, its headlights cut. The engine was running, a low rumble in the silence. Through the windshield, illuminated by the glow of a dashboard light, she saw a face she recognized. It was Sal, Eric's friend. He was watching the staff door. Lena stepped back inside immediately, her heart hammering against her ribs. She turned to run back toward the manager's office, but she collided with a solid wall of muscle. She gasped. Looking up, it was Damien. He had just come down the back stairs, Marco a step behind him. He is here, Lena breathed, grabbing Damien's lapels without thinking. His friend, in the car. Damien's face hardened instantly. Marco, check the back. Marco drew a handgun from beneath his jacket, a movement so smooth and practiced it was terrifying, and slipped out the door into the alley. Damien wrapped an arm around Lena, pulling her away from the door and into the shadows of the loading bay. Stay close to me, he ordered. A moment later, Marco stuck his head back in. He saw me and peeled out. He is gone, but he was definitely waiting. Damien looked down at Lena. She was shaking again. The bravado of the last few days had evaporated, leaving only the raw terror of a hunted animal. You are not taking the bus, Damien said. Marco, bring the car around to the front. We are leaving. The walk through the club to the front entrance was a blur. Damien kept her tucked against his side, his arm heavy and protective around her shoulders. Lena was pressed against his chest, the wool of his coat scratching her cheek. She could hear the steady, rhythmic thud of his heart. It was slow, calm, utterly at odds with her own racing pulse. He smelled of rain and authority. His grip on her shoulder was firm, almost bruising, but she welcomed the pain. It was a tether to reality. It was proof that she was not alone. They ended up in the small, cramped office behind the bar while Marco brought the car around. The room was filled with stacks of invoices and boxes of liquor. Lena sank onto a folding chair, burying her face in her hands. I cannot do this, she sobbed, the dam finally breaking. I cannot live like this. Looking over my shoulder every second, wondering if today is the day he decides to kill me. Damien leaned against the desk, crossing his arms. He watched her fall apart, his expression unreadable. Why won't he just leave me alone? Lena cried, her voice rising with anger. I gave him the apartment. I gave him the car. I took nothing but my clothes. I let him control every penny I made for 5 years. I let him isolate me from my family. I let him make me feel like I was nothing. And it is still not enough. She looked up at Damien, tears streaming down her face. He wants to own me. He thinks I am property. Damien listened in silence. His jaw was clenched so tight a tendon stood out in his neck. His eyes were dark pits of fury. When she finished, the silence in the room was deafening. He pushed off the desk and walked over to her. He crouched down so that they were at eye level. He did not touch her, but his intensity was palpable. He won't touch you again, Damien said quietly. Lena looked at him, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. How can you promise that? You do not know him. He's crazy. I know his type, Damien said, and I know what I am capable of. There was a darkness in his tone that made Lena shiver, but it also drew her in. She looked at his lips, then up to his eyes. Why do you care? She asked, her voice trembling. You barely know me. I am just a bartender. Why are you doing this? Damien hesitated. For a second, the mask slipped. He looked at her mouth, his gaze lingering there with a hunger that had nothing to do with protection. I do not tolerate men who hurt women, he said. It was a deflection, and they both knew it, before Lena could press him. Marco knocked on the door frame. Car is ready. Boss. 2 nights later, the escalation occurred. Lena was walking up the steps to her apartment building. Marco had dropped her off at the corner, at her insistence, trying to maintain some semblance of independence, and was watching from the street. As she fumbled for her keys, a figure lunged from the shadows of the vestibule. Lena screamed, hands grabbed her shoulders, spinning her around. It was Eric. He looked disheveled, his eyes bloodshot and wild. I told you I would see you, he shouted, shaking her. Before he could strike her, a dark shape tackled him from the side. Marco hit Eric with the force of a linebacker, driving him into the brick wall. Eric crumpled to the pavement, wheezing. Marco stood over him, adjusting his suit jacket. Touch her again and you will not get up, Marco said calmly. Damien's car screeched to the curb seconds later. He was out of the vehicle before it stopped moving. He stormed up the steps, checking Lena for injuries with frantic hands. Did he hurt you? Damien demanded. No, Lena gasped, clutching her chest. Marco stopped him. Damien turned to where Eric was groaning on the ground. He took a step toward him, his fists clenched, but Marco stepped in his path. Not here, boss. Too many windows. Damien took a deep breath, forcing himself to regain control. He turned back to Lena. That is it, he said. You are not staying here. I have nowhere else to go. Lena protested weakly. I have an apartment, Damien said. It is above Salvio's, my restaurant in the North End. It is secure. Keycard access. Steel doors. My men eat there every night. You will be safe. Lena hesitated. Moving into his property felt like crossing a line. It was surrendering her independence. But then she looked at Eric, who was spitting blood on the sidewalk and glaring at her with pure hatred. She looked at the dark street. Okay, she whispered. Damien did not waste time. He had Marco drive Eric away with a final warning, while he personally drove Lena to the new apartment. The space was beautiful. It was located above a high-end Italian restaurant with warm brick walls, hardwood floors, and a kitchen that was bigger than Lena's entire old studio. It smelled of basil and garlic from the restaurant below. Damien locked the heavy steel door behind them. He watched as Lena set her single bag of belongings on the floor. She looked small and exhausted in the middle of the room. Are you hungry? He asked. Lena realized she had not eaten in 24 hours. A little. Damien went downstairs and returned 20 minutes later with takeout containers from the restaurant kitchen. He set them on the granite island counter. They ate in silence for a while, standing at the counter, picking at pasta and grilled vegetables with chopsticks they found in a drawer. A strange, domestic incongruity. The adrenaline of the evening was fading, leaving behind a raw, exposed nerve. Lena reached for the water pitcher at the same time Damien did. Their fingers brushed. The contact was electric. Lena pulled her hand back, but she did not step away. She looked up at him. The kitchen light was soft, casting half of his face in shadow. He looked tired. He looked human. Thank you, she said softly, for everything. I do not know how I can ever repay you. Damien set his chopsticks down. He turned to face her fully. I do not want payment. Lena, then what do you want? She asked. The question hung in the air, heavy and charged. Damien looked at her. He looked at the curve of her neck, the pulse beating at her throat. He stepped closer, invading her space, but slowly, giving her every chance to retreat. Lena did not retreat. She held her breath, her heart pounding against her ribs. Damien reached out, his hand large and warm, cupped her jaw. His thumb brushed over her cheekbone. His touch was incredibly gentle, a stark contrast to the violence he commanded. He lowered his head. When his lips met hers, it was not an explosion, but a slow burn. It was tentative at first, a question asked and answered. Lena let out a soft sigh and leaned into him. Her hands came up to rest on his chest, her fingers curling into the crisp fabric of his white dress shirt. Damien groaned low in his throat. His other hand slid around her waist, pulling her flush against him. The kiss deepened, becoming hungry, desperate. It tasted of danger and salvation. For a moment, Lena forgot about Eric. She forgot about the fear. She only felt Damien, his heat, his strength. The way he seemed to surround her completely. She opened to him, and the intensity ratcheted up. Damien's grip on her waist tightened. He pressed her back against the edge of the counter. Then, abruptly, he pulled back. He was breathing hard, his chest heaving against her palms. His eyes were blown wide, dark with desire, but there was conflict there too. He stepped back, creating a foot of distance between them. He ran a hand through his hair, looking agitated. "I am sorry," he said, his voice rough. Lena blinked, dazed. "Why?" "Because you are vulnerable," Damien said. "You are scared, and you are running on adrenaline, and I am the one standing here protecting you. I do not want you to feel pressured. I do not want you to feel like you owe me this because I gave you a place to sleep." Lana stared at him. She saw the honor beneath the criminal exterior. He wanted her, that much was obvious, but he wanted her to be safe more than he wanted to have her. "I wanted it," she whispered. Damien looked at her, his expression pained. "I know, but tonight, I need you to just feel safe. That is all." He stepped away, putting the width of the kitchen island between them. "The bedroom is down the hall," he said, his voice returning to a strained professional tone. "I will take the couch." He turned and walked into the living room, leaving Lena standing in the kitchen, her lips still tingling, her heart aching with a confusing mix of rejection and longing. She touched her mouth, realizing that for the first time in her life, a man had stopped not because he didn't want her, but because he respected her too much to take advantage. And that, she realized, was far more dangerous than any gun. The weeks that followed blurred into a rhythm that Lena found surprisingly comforting. Despite the chaotic circumstances that had brought her there, she had settled into the secure apartment above Salvio's, the Italian restaurant Damien owned in the North End. It was a fortress of brick and steel, accessible only by a keycard and a private elevator, but it was also warm. To maintain her independence, and perhaps to keep her mind from eating itself alive with anxiety, Lena had insisted on working. Damien had hesitated but eventually placed her as a bookkeeper at the Harbor Grind, a high-end cafe he owned near the financial district. It was a legitimate business, bustling with lawyers and stockbrokers, but as Lena reconciled the weekly ledgers, she began to notice the anomalies. There were cash infusions that did not match the register receipts, and consulting fees paid to companies that did not seem to exist on any map. She realized with a jolt that she was looking at the intricate plumbing of Damien's empire, the places where dirty money was washed until it sparkled clean. She said nothing, simply balancing the columns with the discretion of a woman who knew that some stones were better left unturned. Her days developed a pattern. She would arrive at the cafe at 9 in the morning, work until 3, and then return to the secure apartment. But the highlight of the day was always the lunch hour. Damien began dropping by. At first, he claimed he was there to check on the management or review the inventory, but soon, the pretense evaporated. He would arrive at noon, the bell above the door chiming, and the entire staff would straighten their spines. He would bypass the manager and walk straight to the small glass-walled office where Lena worked. "I brought lunch," he would say, placing a paper bag from a nearby deli on her desk. They would sit in the small office, the blinds partially drawn. Damien would loosen his tie, shedding the armor of the dawn for 30 minutes. They talked about safe things at first, the weather, the coffee blends, the restaurant below her apartment, but slowly, The conversations deepened. One Tuesday, while picking at a salad, Damien asked her about the textbooks he had seen on her coffee table during a brief security check. Accounting, he asked? Lena flushed, feeling exposed. I have always wanted to go back to school. I was 2 years into a finance degree when I met Eric. He did not think it was a good use of money. He said I was smart enough to pour drinks. Damien stopped eating. He looked at her with an intensity that made the air in the small room feel thin. He was wrong, Damien said firmly. You have a mind for patterns. Lena, I see how you organize the books here. You catch mistakes my actual accountants miss. Lena looked down, hiding a smile. It is just a dream. It costs thousands of dollars to finish a degree. Then we will find a way, he said. It was not a grand gesture of charity, but a statement of fact. In those quiet moments, amidst the smell of roasted coffee beans and old paper, Lena felt herself falling. It was not just his looks or his power. It was the way he listened. He remembered the name of her childhood dog. He remembered that she hated cilantro. He treated her thoughts as if they were valuable currency. But while Lena was building a new life, Eric Hale was festering in the ruins of his old one. Eric sat in a dive bar on the outskirts of the city, nursing a cheap beer and a bruised ego. His face was still swollen from where Marco had slammed him into the brick wall. He stared at his phone, scrolling through old photos of Lena, his anger curdling into a dark, obsessive hatred. He had lost his wife, his control, and his dignity, and he blamed one man for all of it, Damien Vascari. A shadow fell over his table. Mind if we sit? A voice asked. Eric looked up. 2 men stood there. One was tall and wiry, with a spiderweb tattoo on his neck. The other was older, dressed in a suit that looked expensive but flashy. Eric recognized the older man from the streets. It was Miguel Rojas, a lieutenant in the Rojas Syndicate. What do you want? Eric muttered. We hear you have a problem with Vascari, Miguel said, sliding into the booth without waiting for an invitation. We have a problem with him too, Eric scoffed. Good for you. He's untouchable. He has cops in his pocket and an army of goons. He's not untouchable, Miguel corrected, his eyes gleaming like polished obsidian. Everyone has a weak spot, and lately, Vascari has been very distracted by a woman. Eric's hand tightened around his beer glass. That is my wife. Ex-wife, Miguel said with a shrug. But that does not matter to us. What matters is that you know her. You know her habits. And now, you know where Vascari keeps her. Eric narrowed his eyes. What is in it for me? Miguel leaned in, lowering his voice. You want her back? We can help you get her. You want to see Vascari bleed? We can make that happen. All we need is for you to be our eyes. Tell us where he goes. Tell us when he is vulnerable. Help us break him. And you get the girl. Eric looked at the men. He knew getting involved with the Rojas was like swimming with sharks, but his desire for revenge was stronger than his instinct for self-preservation. I am listening, Eric said. A week later, the invitation arrived at the secure apartment. It was on heavy, cream-colored cardstock with gold embossing, the Harborview Community Foundation, annual gala. Lena was staring at it when the elevator chimed and Damien walked in. He looked tired, rubbing the back of his neck, but his face softened when he saw her. I see you got the mail, he said. Lena held up the card. You want me to go to this? I would like you to be my date, Damien said, walking into the kitchen to pour himself a glass of water. Lena hesitated. Damien, this is a public event. There will be photographers. The mayor will be there. If I go with you, everyone will know. That is the point, Damien said. He turned, leaning against the counter. Eric is still out there. The Rojas are circling. I need to send a message to the city. I need them to know that you are not just an employee or a fleeting interest. You are with me. And in my world, that means you are off limits. It was a strategic move, Lena knew. But looking at him, she saw the vulnerability behind the strategy. He was asking her to step into the light with him. He was asking her to claim him, just as he was claiming her. Okay, she said. I will go. The night of the gala arrived with a flurry of nerves. Damien had sent a stylist to the apartment, and for 3 hours, Lena was pulled, painted, and polished. When she finally looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. She wore a gown of midnight blue silk that draped over her curves like water. It was simple, with a high neck and a daringly low back, elegant and sophisticated. Her hair was swept up, exposing the long line of her neck. When the elevator doors opened and Damien stepped out, he stopped dead. He was wearing a black tuxedo, tailored to perfection, the white shirt crisp against his tan skin. He looked like a prince of the city, powerful and commanding. But as his eyes swept over Lena, the mask cracked. His breath hitched audibly. His eyes darkened, the pupils dilating until they were almost black. He stood there for a long moment, simply drinking her in. "You look—" Damien started, but his voice failed him. He cleared his throat and tried again, his voice lower, rougher. "You look breathtaking. Lena?" He walked over to her, taking her hand and raising it to his lips. He kissed her knuckles, his eyes never leaving hers. "Are you ready?" he asked. Lena nodded, her heart hammering against her ribs. Yes. The arrival at the hotel ballroom was a sensory overload. Flashbulbs popped like lightning as the valet opened the door of Damien's limousine. A red carpet stretched up the stairs, lined with reporters and curious onlookers. Damien stepped out first, buttoning his jacket. He turned and offered his hand to Lena. As she stepped out into the flashing lights, she felt a wave of panic, but Damien's hand moved immediately to her hip. His grip was firm, grounding her. He pulled her close to his side, his body a solid wall between her and the chaos. They walked the carpet together. Lena kept her head high, mimicking his confidence. She could hear the whispers. "Who is she? Is that Vascari's new woman? Look at the way he holds her." Damien did not look at the cameras. He looked only ahead, his expression cool and bored, but his thumb traced small, soothing circles on her hip bone through the silk of her dress. Inside. The ballroom was awash of gold light and crystal chandeliers. A live orchestra played a waltz. Waiters moved through the crowd with trays of champagne. Damien navigated the room with ease, introducing Lena to city council members and business tycoons. He introduced her simply as Lena, with no explanation, his tone daring anyone to ask for more. When the music slowed, Damien turned to her. "Dance with me," he said. It was not a question. He led her to the floor, taking her in his arms. He placed one hand on the small of her back, his fingers splayed possessively. Lena placed her hand on his shoulder. Her other hand clasped in his. They moved together seamlessly. Lena had not danced in years, but Damien led with such absolute certainty that she only had to follow. They spun slowly, their bodies brushing with every turn. "You are doing well," Damien whispered in her ear, his breath warm against her skin. "I am terrified," she whispered back. "You do not look it. You look like a queen." Lena looked up at him. The way he was looking at her made the rest of the room disappear. There were 200 people watching, but it felt like they were the only 2 people on Earth. "I feel safe with you," she admitted, the words slipping out before she could check them. Damien's arm tightened around her waist, pulling her flush against his chest. She could feel the hard planes of his body, the heat radiating through his suit. "Good," he murmured. "Keep looking at me." Lena. Ignore the rest of them, but the world outside their bubble refused to be ignored. Halfway through the evening, a disturbance rippled near the main bar. Voices were raised, a glass shattered. Damien stopped dancing instantly. His body went rigid. He turned his head, his eyes locking onto the source of the commotion. Lena followed his gaze and felt the blood drain from her face. It was Eric. He was wearing an ill-fitting suit, clearly rented, and he was arguing with the bartender. He looked drunk, his face flushed, his movements erratic. He must have used a forged invitation to get past security. There was no other way. Before Damien could move, Eric saw them. "There she is," Eric shouted, pointing a shaking finger. "There is my wife." The music faltered. The conversation in the ballroom died. All eyes turned to Eric, and then to Lena and Damien. Eric stumbled forward, knocking into a waiter. He marched onto the dance floor, his eyes wild. "You think you are special?" Eric spat, looking at Damien. "You think because you have money you can just steal a man's wife? She is mine. She belongs to me." Damien released Lena. gently pushing her behind him. He stepped forward, his posture relaxed but radiating a lethal kind of calm. Marco and 2 other security guards were already moving through the crowd, but Damien held up a hand to stop them. "You are making a mistake," Damien said. His voice was not loud, but it carried through the silent room like the crack of a whip. Eric laughed, a manic, desperate sound. "A mistake? The mistake was her leaving me. Tell them. Lena, tell them how you are cheating on me with this criminal." Damien took one more step. The distance between them closed. Damien was taller, broader, and infinitely more composed. "This is a private event," Damien said, his voice dropping to a temperature that could freeze water. "And you are upsetting my date." "Your date?" Eric sneered. "She is a whore who—" Damien moved. It was a blur of motion. He did not strike Eric. He simply stepped into his personal space, grabbing the lapels of Eric's cheap jacket and yanking him forward. He leaned down, bringing his face inches from Eric's. Whatever Damien whispered, no one else heard it. But the effect on Eric was immediate. The color drained from his face. His eyes widened in genuine terror. He went limp in Damien's grasp. Damien shoved him back. Disgusted, "Get him out of here," Damien ordered. Marco and the guards descended, grabbing Eric by the arms and dragging him toward the exit. Eric did not fight. He stared at Damien with a mixture of fear and hatred, his eyes locking briefly with Lena's before he was hauled through the double doors. The room was silent. Damien adjusted his cuffs. He turned to the orchestra. "Play," he commanded. The music started again, hesitant at first, then swelling. Damien turned back to Lena. His face was a mask of stone, but his eyes were blazing with suppressed rage. "We are leaving," he said. The ride back to the penthouse was silent. The air in the car was thick with adrenaline. Lena sat with her hands clenched in her lap, shaking. The image of Eric crashing the gala, the humiliation, the fear, it was all too much. When they reached the penthouse, the private elevator opened directly into the living room. The city skyline sprawled out beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, a glittering tapestry of lights. Damien threw his jacket onto a chair and paced to the window, tearing his tie loose. He looked like a caged tiger. "I should have killed him," Damien growled, staring out at the city. "I should have ended it tonight." Lena stood by the elevator, her wrap clutching her shoulders. "Damien, stop." He spun around. "He humiliated you. He threatened you, in front of my entire city." "He is desperate," Lena cried back, stepping into the room. "Can't you see that? He's trying to provoke you." "He succeeded," Damien shouted. He marched across the room toward her. Lena did not back down. The fear she had felt at the gala was transmuting into something else. Anger, adrenaline, and a fierce, burning need. "You cannot just hurt people because you are angry," Lena said, her voice shaking. "I am not angry because of my pride. Lena!" Damien stopped inches from her. "I am angry because he was near you. Because for 10 seconds, I could not guarantee your safety. And that terrifies me." The admission hung in the air. Lena looked up at him. She saw the fear in his eyes, the raw, unguarded emotion of a man who was used to controlling everything and suddenly found himself terrified of losing the one thing he couldn't control. "Damien?" she whispered. She reached out and touched his chest. Her hand rested over his heart, which was beating violently. "I am right here," she said. "I am safe." Damien covered her hand with his. His breathing was ragged. He looked at her mouth, then at her eyes. The anger in his face melted into something desperate. "I need you." He groaned. He dipped his head and captured her lips. The kiss was nothing like the one in the kitchen. This was fire. It was a release of weeks of tension, fear, and denied longing. Lena threw her arms around his neck, pulling him closer, her fingers tangling in his dark hair. Damien's arms wrapped around her waist, lifting her off the ground. He carried her across the room, pressing her back against the cool glass of the window. The city lights a blur behind her. He set her down, his hands roaming over the silk of her dress, tracing the curve of her waist, her hips. Lena's hands worked at the buttons of his shirt, desperate to feel his skin. "Damien, please," she gasped against his mouth. He pulled back for a second, his forehead resting against hers, his eyes searching her face. "Are you sure?" he rasped. "If we do this—" There is no going back. You are mine, Lena. In every way. Lena looked at him. She knew the risks. She knew the danger. But she also knew that she had never felt more alive than she did in this moment, in his arms. I am yours, she whispered. Damien let out a sound that was half growl, half prayer. He swept her up into his arms again and carried her toward the bedroom. The door kicked shut behind them. In the dim light of the room, amidst the tangled sheets and the shadows, the rest of the world fell away. There was no Eric, no syndicate, no past. There was only the heat of skin on skin, the murmur of names spoken like vows, and the profound, earth-shattering realization that two broken people had finally found the pieces that fit. The next morning, the sun streamed through the heavy curtains, painting stripes of light across the duvet. Lena woke slowly. She was wearing Damien's dress shirt, the fabric swallowing her small frame. She felt a soreness in her muscles that was a pleasant reminder of the night before, and a heavy, warm weight in her chest that felt like love. She sat up. Damien was already awake. He was sitting in the armchair by the window, fully dressed in slacks and a fresh shirt, holding a cup of coffee. He was watching her. "Good morning," he said softly. Lena smiled, pulling the blanket up around her knees. "Good morning." Damien stood and walked over to the bed. He sat on the edge, handing her the coffee. He reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch incredibly gentle. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Happy," Lena said honestly, and a little scared. Damien's expression became serious. He did not try to brush away her fear. He nodded. "You should be," he said. Lena's smile faltered. "What?" Damien took her hand, his thumb rubbing over her knuckles. "Last night, it changed things. Before, you were someone I was protecting. Now, you are my partner." He looked her dead in the eye. "Eric is not going to stop. Lena, and now that he made a scene with the Rojas backing him, the syndicate knows you are my weakness. They will come for you to get to me. By being with me, you have stepped into the line of fire." Lena gripped his hand tighter. She looked at the man who had saved her, the man who had worshipped her body only hours ago, the man who was now looking at her with a terrifying honesty. "I know," she said. "I am not running away. Damien lifted her hand to his lips, kissing her fingers. "Then I will burn the city down before I let them touch you," he promised. But as Lena looked at the grim set of his jaw, she knew that promises, no matter how fierce, could not stop a bullet. The war had officially begun. November turned to December, bringing a biting chill to the air off the harbor. In the penthouse above the city, however, the mornings were warm. Lena Carter would wake to the smell of espresso and the sound of Damien Viscari moving quietly around the room. Dressing for a war she was only beginning to understand. Their relationship existed in a strange, suspended reality. Inside the walls of the penthouse, it was tender. They shared breakfast at the Marble Island, Damien buttering her toast with a domesticity that seemed at odds with the gun holstered beneath his arm. He would kiss her goodbye at the door, his lips lingering on hers, a silent promise to return. But the moment Lena stepped outside, the illusion of normalcy shattered. She was never alone. Two men, usually Marco and a silent giant named Silas, were always within 10 feet of her. They drove her to the harbor grind in an armored SUV. They stood outside the glass office while she balanced the books. They escorted her to the restroom. They checked her coffee before she drank it. Lena felt safe. Yes, but she also felt like a bird in a cage made of gold and Kevlar. One Tuesday afternoon, Lena sat in her office at the cafe, staring at a spreadsheet that refused to balance. She looked up to see Marco standing by the espresso machine, glaring at a customer who had looked at Lena for a second too long. "Marco," she called out, opening the door. "You're scaring the regulars." Marco turned, his face softening only slightly. "Just doing my job. Miss Carter, I am just doing payroll," Lena said with a sigh. "Nobody is going to assassinate me over the barista's tips." Marco did not smile. "The boss says we take no chances." That was the refrain. The boss says. Damien's protection was absolute, but it was suffocating. Lena missed the freedom of walking to the corner store without an escort. She missed the silence of being alone. While Lena chafed against her restrictions, Eric Hale was busy exploiting them. In a dimly lit garage in the industrial district, Eric stood over a sprawling map of the city spread across a workbench. The air smelled of grease and stale cigarette smoke. Miguel Rojas and 3 of his top lieutenants stood opposite him. Eric traced a line on the map with a dirty fingernail. "He moves the cash on Thursdays," Eric said, his voice thick with a mix of fear and vindictive triumph. "He uses a laundry service van, legit markings, harbor linen supply. It leaves the casino at 4 in the morning and heads to the warehouse on Pier 9. Miguel looked at Eric with a mixture of amusement and disgust. "You are sure about this?" Eric nodded vigorously. "I heard her talking about the invoices. She does the books for the shell companies, too. She does not know what she is looking at. But I remember the names she mentioned on the phone. Harbor Linen, Blue Tide Logistics. It is all him." Miguel smiled, revealing a gold tooth. "You are a useful little rat, aren't you? I do not care about the money," Eric spat. "I want my wife. You promised me. If I help you break him, I get Lena." Miguel clapped a heavy hand on Eric's shoulder. "When Viscari falls, you can have whatever is left." The attacks began 48 hours later. It started with a fire. A fleet of delivery trucks belonging to Blue Tide Logistics was firebombed in a secure lot. $3 million in inventory and vehicles were reduced to twisted metal and ash. 2 days later, the Harbor Linen van was intercepted. The driver was beaten, badly but alive, and $200,000 in cash vanished. Lena watched the change in Damien happen in real time. He came home later and later. The tenderness in his eyes was replaced by a cold, calculating distance. He spent hours on the phone in his study, the door firmly shut. When he did emerge, he smelled of smoke and scotch. He held her at night, but his grip was tighter, desperate, as if he were trying to anchor himself to the only thing in his life that wasn't burning. One evening, Lena was sitting in the living room trying to read a textbook on forensic accounting. The door to Damien's study was cracked open. She heard his voice, not raised, but terrifyingly flat. "I do not care who he is," Damien said. He put his hands on a woman. He broke her jaw. There was a pause as the person on the other end spoke. "No," Damien interrupted, his tone dipping into a register Lena had never heard. "We do not give warnings to men like that. You find him. You take him to the basement and you make sure he never has the ability to put his hands on another woman again. Do you understand me? Break them." "Both of them?" Lena froze. The book slid from her lap onto the floor with a thud. Damien hung up the phone. He heard the noise and walked to the doorway. He saw Lena sitting there, her face pale, staring at him as if he were a stranger. He stopped, his hand still on the doorframe. He looked at her, and for a second she saw the monster the city feared. Then he blinked, and the mask slipped back on. "Lena," he said, stepping into the room, "you are going to cripple him," she whispered. Damien did not pretend not to understand. "He beat his girlfriend nearly to death. Lena, the police will not touch him because his father is a judge. Someone has to balance the scales." "So you become the judge?" Lena asked, standing up. "You become the executioner?" "I become what is necessary," Damien said, walking toward her. Lena took a step back. It was an involuntary movement, a reflex born of her past trauma, but it hit Damien like a physical blow. He stopped dead. "You are afraid of me," he said. "It was not a question. I'm afraid of what you can do," Lena said, her voice trembling. "I listen to you order violence like you are ordering dinner. Make sure he never uses his hands again. Damien, that is barbaric. It is justice," he countered, his voice rising slightly. "It is the only language these people speak. You think I can protect you with politeness. You think I can keep Eric and the Rojas away by asking nicely. I never asked you to be a monster for me," Lena cried. "I am a monster, so you do not have to be a victim," Damien shouted back. The silence that followed was ringing. They stood 5 feet apart, the air between them crackling with the electricity of the argument. Lena looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight of the empire crumbling around him, and the ferocious, terrifying love that drove him to violence. "You sound like him," she whispered. The color drained from Damien's face. He looked as if she had shot him. "Like Eric?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "You say you are doing this for me," Lena said, tears spilling over. "You say you are controlling where I go, who I see, what I do, all for my safety, but it feels the same. Damien, I am trapped. I am watching you hurt people. I am watching you lose yourself." Damien closed his eyes. He took a deep, shuddering breath. When he opened them again, the anger was gone, replaced by a profound sadness. He walked over to the side table and poured a glass of whiskey. He downed it in one swallow. "If you want to leave," he said, his back to her, "I will not stop you." Lena blinked, surprised. "What?" "I am not him," Damien said, turning around. "I do not own you. If I am too much for you, you can walk out that door." He gestured to the elevator. "But you need to understand something. Lena, the world outside this penthouse is not safe for you anymore. Eric is out there. The Rojas are out there. They want to hurt you to hurt me. If you leave my protection, I cannot promise you will be safe. I can only promise that I will die trying to avenge you." Lena looked at the elevator doors. She looked at Damien. She loved him. She realized that with a painful clarity. She loved the way he looked at her in the mornings. She loved his laugh. She loved that he had saved her. But she could not breathe in this atmosphere of constant violence. She felt like she was the cause of it all, the bait that had brought the wolves to his door. "If I leave," she said slowly, "maybe they will stop coming for you. Maybe if I am not here, you won't be distracted. You can fight them without worrying about me." Damien shook his head. "It does not work like that. I need space." "Damien," Lena said, her voice firming, "I need to think. I cannot stay here tonight." Damien stared at her for a long minute, then he nodded once. "Okay, where will you go?" Lena hesitated. She knew if she told him, he would send guards. He would turn her sanctuary into another fortress. "I will be safe," she said evasively. "I just need a few days." Damien looked like he wanted to argue, to forbid it, to order Marco to lock the doors, but he had said he wasn't Eric. He had to prove it. "Take the sedan," he said quietly. "It is in the garage." Lena packed a bag in 10 minutes. It was the hardest thing she had ever done. When she walked back into the living room, Damien was standing by the window, looking out at the city. He did not turn around. "Goodbye, Damien," she whispered. He did not answer. Lena took the elevator down to the garage. She found the modest sedan she had bought a month ago, a symbol of independence she rarely got to use. She threw her bag in the passenger seat and drove out into the night. She felt a strange mix of liberation and terror. She was alone. For the first time in weeks, she was completely alone. She drove aimlessly for 20 minutes to make sure she wasn't being followed, checking her mirrors constantly, seeing nothing but empty streets. She headed toward the suburbs. She was going to Sarah's house. Sarah was a waitress at the Harbor Grind, a kind, older woman who had offered her spare room weeks ago when Lena had first mentioned her housing troubles. Lena thought she was being smart. She thought she was de-escalating the situation. She did not know about the small, magnetic black box attached to the underside of her rear bumper. Eric had planted it 3 weeks ago, during the brief scuffle outside her old apartment, before Marco had tackled him. It had been dormant, waiting for her to move, 3 miles away, in the passenger seat of a Rojas SUV. Eric's phone pinged. He looked at the screen. A red dot was moving away from the city center, heading north on Interstate 93. "She's moving," Eric said, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "And she is alone." Miguel Rojas, driving the SUV, laughed. "Vescari let her go? He's softer than I thought. He thinks she is safe," Eric said. "He thinks he won." "Let's go show him how wrong he is," Miguel said, gunning the engine. Lena arrived at Sarah's apartment complex just after 11 at night. It was a quiet, working-class neighborhood, lined with brick buildings and street lamps that flickered intermittently. She parked the car and sat for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. She felt a pang of guilt for leaving Damien. She pictured him alone in that massive penthouse, waiting for the next attack. Had she made a mistake? Was she just running away because things had gotten hard? No, she told herself. I need to clear my head. I need to know that I can stand on my own 2 feet. She grabbed her bag and walked up the stairs to the 3rd floor. Sarah had left a key under the mat for her. Lena retrieved it, her hands shaking slightly from the cold. She unlocked the door and stepped inside. "Sarah?" she called out softly. The apartment was dark. Strange. Sarah had said she would leave a light on. The air inside felt stale, heavy. There was no answer. Lena frowned, reaching for the light switch on the wall. She flipped it. Nothing happened. The bulb had been unscrewed. A prickle of pure instinct ran down her spine. The hair on her arm stood up. She smelled it then. It was faint, masked by the scent of Sarah's vanilla air freshener, but unmistakable. It was a cheap, musky cologne that smelled like desperate nights and aggression. Drakkar Noir. Eric. Lena dropped her bag. She spun around to the door, her hand reaching for the knob. From the shadows of the kitchen, a figure lunged. Lena opened her mouth to scream, but a heavy, leather-gloved hand clamped over her face, stifling the sound into a terrified whimper. An arm wrapped around her waist, lifting her off her feet. She kicked out, her heels connecting with shins, but the man holding her was strong. "Easy, sweetheart," a voice whispered in her ear, a voice from her nightmares. Eric dragged her backward into the living room. 2 other men stepped out of the hallway. They were dressed in dark clothes, holding guns loosely at their sides. Rojas men. "Where is Sarah?" Lena tried to scream against the hand, but it came out as a muffled gargle. "Don't worry about your friend," Eric hissed, enjoying the terror in her eyes. "She is sleeping. We gave her something to help her rest." He threw Lena onto the couch. She scrambled to get up, but one of the Rojas men stepped forward and shoved her back down, pressing the barrel of a pistol against her forehead. "Sit still," the man said. Lena froze. Tears sprang to her eyes, hot and fast. She looked at Eric. He was smiling. It was the smile of a man who had finally regained control. "You thought you could leave me for him?" Eric taunted, pacing in front of her. "You thought you could upgrade?" He pulled out his phone. "Look at me." "Lena." Lena turned her face away. Eric grabbed her chin, forcing her to look at the camera. He wrapped his arm around her neck, pulling her cheek against his chest in a mock embrace. "Smile for the boyfriend," Eric said. Flash. The light blinded her for a second. Eric looked at the photo. It was perfect. Lena looked terrified, tears streaming down her face, with Eric grinning possessively over her shoulder and the gun clearly visible in the frame. He tapped the screen. "Attaching the photo to a message," Miguel asked from the doorway. "Did you send it?" Eric hit send. "Just now," Eric said. "What is the caption?" Miguel asked, checking his weapon. Eric looked down at Lena, his eyes devoid of any humanity. "Come and get her." Lena squeezed her eyes shut, a single thought screaming in her mind. Damien. She had left to save him, and in doing so, she had just lured him into the trap that might kill him. The silence in the penthouse was absolute, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside Damien Viscari. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the city lights that usually gave him a sense of ownership, but tonight they felt like mocking eyes. It had been 3 hours since Lena left, 3 hours since he had let her drive away in a sedan to find space, convinced that he was giving her freedom when, in reality, he might have handed her a death sentence. His phone vibrated on the Marble Island. It was a single, short buzz. In his line of work, that sound rarely meant good news. Damien walked over and picked it up. The screen illuminated his face in the dark room. It was a message from an unknown number. He swiped it open. The image that loaded froze the blood in his veins. It was Lena. She was sitting on a dirty couch, her eyes wide with terror, tears tracking through the makeup she had worn for him. But it was the arm draped casually, possessively around her neck that made Damien's vision tunnel. He knew that arm. He knew the cheap leather jacket. And he knew the man grinning over her shoulder, holding a gun to the camera. Eric. Below the photo was a text message. "Come and get her." The old textile factory on River Road. Come alone or she bleeds. Damien stared at the phone. For 10 years, he had built a reputation as a man of ice. He was the strategist, the negotiator, the man who never let emotion dictate a business decision. But in that moment, the ice shattered. A roar of pure, primal fury erupted from his chest, and he hurled a crystal tumbler against the far wall. It exploded into 1,000 shards, glittering like diamonds on the hardwood. Marco ran into the room, his hand already on his weapon. "Boss?" Damien turned. His face was a mask of terrifying resolve. "Gear up," Damien ordered, his voice sounding like gravel grinding together. "They have her." Marco looked at the phone Damien thrust at him. He saw the photo, and his expression hardened. But Marco was a professional. He looked at the location. "River Road." Marco said, "That is Rojas territory. It is the old industrial park. Boss, this is a trap. A blind man could see this is a trap." "I do not care," Damien snarled, marching toward his weapon safe hidden behind a panel in the wall. Marco stepped in his path. "You have to think. If we go in there, guns blazing, they might kill her before we even breach the door. We need leverage. Call Detective Rossi. We can have a SWAT team surround the perimeter in 20 minutes. Let the cops take the heat." "No cops," Damien said, punching in the code to the safe. The steel door swung open, revealing rows of firearms. Every minute we wait is a minute she is alone with him. Rossi is too slow, and I am not trusting her life to a detective who might be on Miguel Rojas's payroll next week. "But going in alone is suicide," Marco argued, his voice rising. "I am not going alone," Damien said, pulling out a tactical vest and a heavy-caliber handgun. "I am taking the Alpha team. We move in 10 minutes. He turned to face his right-hand man. The look in Damien's eyes was not the look of a businessman. It was the look of a man who was prepared to burn the world down to save one person. "If you are not with me, Marco, stay here." Marco hesitated for only a fraction of a second. Then he nodded, pulling out his own phone to alert the crew. "I am with you. But if we die tonight, I am going to be very annoyed." Damien did not smile. He checked the chamber of his weapon. "If she dies," Damien said softly, "we are all already dead." The warehouse on River Road smelled of rust, damp rot, and ancient grease. It was a cavernous space, the high ceiling lost in shadows, illuminated only by a few harsh, hanging work lights that cast long, distorted shadows across the concrete floor. Lena sat in the center of the room, her wrists bound tightly to the back of a heavy metal chair. Her mouth was dry, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Eric was pacing in front of her. He was manic, his mood swinging wildly with every lap he took. "We are going to be happy again, Lena," Eric said, his voice dropping to a wheedling, pathetic tone. "Once he is out of the way, you will see. I forgive you. I know he brainwashed you with his money and his fancy clothes." He stopped, his face twisting into a snarl. "But you liked it, didn't you? You liked acting like a whore for him." Lena flinched as he leaned in close, his breath smelling of stale alcohol. "I did what I had to do to survive," Lena said, her voice trembling but clear. "Just like I did with you." Eric slapped her. It wasn't a hard blow, more of a stinging reminder of his control, but it made her ears ring. "Shut up," Eric shouted. "You do not get to speak." From the shadows near the loading dock, a slow, mocking clap echoed. Miguel Rojas stepped into the circle of light. He was leaning against a crate, smoking a cigarette, watching the domestic drama with the detached amusement of a man watching a reality TV show. "You are very emotional." "Eric," Miguel said, blowing a stream of smoke toward the ceiling, "it is exhausting to watch." "He is coming," Eric said, turning to Miguel. "You said if I got her, he would come." "He will come," Miguel assured him. "Viscari is predictable. He has a hero complex. And when he walks through those doors, my men will cut him down." Miguel looked at Lena. He walked over to her, tilting her chin up with one finger. "Pretty thing," Miguel mused. "I can see why he likes you. You have spirit. It is a shame you chose the wrong side." Lena looked at Miguel. She saw the calculation in his eyes. He was not like Eric. Eric was a chaotic storm. Miguel was a cold equation. And equations could be unbalanced. She thought of the ledgers she had been reconciling for the past month. She thought of the names she had seen. "Does Eric know?" Lena asked suddenly. Miguel frowned. "Know what?" Lena looked from Miguel to Eric. "Does he know that you are planning to cut him out?" Eric stopped pacing. He looked at Miguel. "What is she talking about?" "She is lying," Miguel said dismissively, dropping his hand from her chin. "She's trying to get in your head." "I saw the books," Lena said, lying with a confidence she did not feel. "Damien keeps detailed records on his rivals. He knows about the deal you made with the suppliers in Newark, the ones Eric introduced you to." She turned her gaze to Eric. "Damien knew you were the connection." "Eric, but the paperwork shows that Miguel transferred the commission to a private account in the Cayman Islands. He's not planning to split the territory with you. He's using you to draw Damien out, and then he is going to get rid of the loose end." Eric's eyes narrowed. He looked at Miguel. The paranoia that was always simmering just beneath his skin began to bubble over. "Is that true?" Eric demanded. "Is that why you brought so many men? To take me out too?" Miguel laughed, but the sound was tight. "Do not be an idiot. She is the enemy. She is lying to save her skin." "Why would I lie?" Lena pressed, seeing the crack and driving a wedge into it. "I am tied to a chair. I am dead either way. I just thought you should know that you are being played. Again." Eric took a step toward Miguel, his hand drifting toward the gun tucked in his waistband. "I want to see the money transfer. Miguel, show me your phone." Miguel threw his cigarette on the ground and crushed it with his heel. "We do not have time for this childishness. He is here." The sound of a heavy vehicle engine cut through the tension. Tires crunched on gravel outside. Car doors slammed. Miguel signaled to his men in the shadows. "Positions." Eric looked torn. He glared at Miguel, then at Lena, and finally at the main bay doors. His hatred for Damien won out over his suspicion of Miguel. But the seed of doubt had been planted. He retreated to stand behind Lena, grabbing her hair and pressing the barrel of his gun to her temple. The small door within the larger bay gate opened. Damien walked in. He was not wearing his suit. He was dressed in tactical black, a vest strapped over his chest, his sleeves rolled up. He held a rifle loosely at his side, pointed at the ground. He walked with a terrifying calm. Stopping 10 yards from where Lena sat, Marco and 3 other men fanned out behind him, their weapons raised and scanning the rafters. Damien's eyes locked onto Lena. He took in the bruise forming on her cheek, the ropes cutting into her wrists. His expression did not change, but the air around him seemed to vibrate with lethal intent. "Let her go," Damien said. His voice was not a shout. It was a statement of fact. Eric laughed, peering out from behind Lena's head. "You do not give orders here. Viscari, look at you, the big bad wolf. You walked right into the trap." "I am here," Damien said, his eyes shifting to Miguel, who was standing on a raised platform near the back. "That was the deal. Me for her." Miguel smiled. "That was the offer." "Yes. But I think I have changed the terms. I think I will take you, and I will keep the girl. She knows too much about my business now." Damien's grip on his rifle tightened. "If you touch her again, Miguel, I will hunt down every person who carries your last name. Empty threats from a dead man." Miguel scoffed. Eric, however, was vibrating with adrenaline. He pressed the gun harder against Lena's skull. She whimpered, squeezing her eyes shut. "Look at him!" "Lena!" Eric shouted. "Look at your savior! He is helpless." Damien took a slow step forward. "Eric, look at me. This is between us. Let her walk away. I will stay. You can do whatever you want to me." "Just let her walk out that door." Eric hesitated. The power of having Damien Viscari, the king of the city, begging him was intoxicating. "You ruined my life." Eric spat. "I am here to pay for it," Damien said. "Let her go." For a second, the warehouse was silent. The tension was stretched so thin it hummed. Then, Eric's paranoia snapped. He saw Marco shift slightly to the left. "He is moving!" Eric screamed. He swung his gun away from Lena's head and fired blindly toward Marco. The shot echoed like a cannon blast. "Drop!" Damien roared. Chaos erupted. Damien did not dive for cover. He sprinted, he ran straight toward Lena, ignoring the bullets that began to fly from the shadows as Miguel's men opened fire. Marco and his team returned fire instantly, their suppressed weapons coughing rhythmically. Bullets sparked off the concrete floor and pinged against the metal beams. Lena screamed, ducking her head as debris rained down. She saw Damien running through the hail of gunfire, his eyes fixed only on her. She knew she could not just sit there. She threw her weight to the right. The heavy metal chair tipped over, crashing onto its side. The impact jarred her shoulder, but it moved her out of the direct line of fire. She landed near a rusted support pillar. Her hands were still bound behind her, but the fall had loosened the knot slightly. She saw a jagged piece of metal protruding from the base of the pillar, a remnant of some old machinery. Gritting her teeth against the pain in her wrists, she sawed the rope against the sharp edge. One strand gave way, then another. Eric was screaming, firing wildly at Damien's approaching figure. Miguel's men were pinned down by Marco's precise suppression fire. The rope snapped. Lena ripped her hands free. She scrambled on her hands and knees, dragging herself behind the thick concrete pillar just as a bullet chipped the floor where her head had been a second ago. "Lena!" Damien's voice was close. "I am here!" she screamed. Damien slid into the cover of the pillar, his chest heaving. He dropped to one knee beside her, checking her over with frantic hands. "Are you hit?" he demanded, shouting over the noise of the gunfight. "No," she gasped. "I am okay." He grabbed her face, kissing her forehead hard. "Stay down. Do not move." He turned to fire back around the pillar, taking down one of Miguel's shooters on the catwalk. But they were outflanked. Eric, in his madness, had not retreated. He had circled around the piles of crates. Damien turned back to check on Lena and froze. Eric was standing 10 feet away. He had a clear shot at both of them. His eyes were wide and white, completely unhinged. "Drop it," Eric screamed. "Drop the gun or I blow her head off." Damien looked at Eric. He looked at the gun pointed at Lena. He did not hesitate. Damien opened his hands. His rifle clattered to the concrete. He raised his hands slowly. "Okay," Damien said, his voice steady. "Okay, it is down." Eric was panting, sweat dripping down his face. "Get on your knees, both of you." Damien sank to his knees. He positioned himself slightly in front of Lena, shielding her with his body. Lena knelt beside him, her hand gripping his arm. "You think you are better than me?" Eric ranted, the gun wavering between them. "You think because you wear a suit you are not a crook? You stole my wife." "I did not steal her," Damien said calmly. "You threw her away." "Shut up," Eric shrieked. He cocked the hammer of the gun. Lena looked at her ex-husband. She saw the man she had once thought she loved, now twisted into something unrecognizable. "Eric, please," she said, her voice cutting through the noise. "Look at what you are doing." Eric looked at her. Tears were streaming down his face. "You made me do this. Lena, you are better than this." She lied, trying to reach whatever humanity was left in him. "Put the gun down. We can just walk away." "I can't," Eric whispered. "It is too late." He raised the gun, aiming directly at Damien's chest. Damien tensed, ready to launch himself at Eric in a final, desperate attempt to take the bullet. From the raised platform, Miguel Rojas watched. He saw Eric losing control. He saw the police sirens that would inevitably follow this much noise, and he saw liability. Eric was going to kill a made man. That brought heat. That brought federal investigations. Miguel had wanted Damien dead, but not like this. Not in a messy, emotional domestic dispute that would splash his organization all over the front page. Miguel raised his own weapon. "You are too loud, amigo," Miguel muttered. He aimed at Eric's back. But Marco, watching through the scope of his rifle from across the warehouse, saw Miguel move. Marco squeezed the trigger. The shot took Miguel in the shoulder. He spun around, his gun firing harmlessly into the ceiling as he fell from the platform with a cry of pain. The sound startled Eric. He flinched. Turning his head, Damien moved. He exploded upward from his knees, closing the 10 feet between them in a heartbeat. He grabbed Eric's wrist, twisting it violently upward, the gun discharged, the bullet shattering a window high above. Eric screamed as his wrist snapped. Damien drove a knee into Eric's gut, doubling him over. He swept Eric's legs out from under him, slamming him to the concrete. Damien was on top of him instantly. He pinned Eric's arms, his face inches from the man who had tormented Lena for years. Damien raised a fist, ready to deliver a blow that would end it. He wanted to... Every instinct in his body screamed to destroy this threat. Damien, Lena's voice pierced the red haze. He froze. He looked up. Lena was standing there, shaking, but her eyes were pleading. "Don't," she whispered. "He is done. Don't become him." Damien looked down at Eric, who was wheezing, defeated and broken. He saw the pathetic reality of the man. Killing him would stain Lena's soul more than his own. Damien lowered his fist. He stood up, hauling Eric up by his collar and shoving him toward the two Vescari guards who had rushed forward. "Tie him up," Damien ordered, his voice cold, "and make sure he does not bleed out before the police get here." The warehouse fell silent, save for the groans of the wounded Rojas men. Then, the sound of sirens began to wail in the distance. Not one or two, but a dozen. Marco walked over, checking Miguel, who was groaning on the floor, alive but neutralized. Marco looked at Damien. "You called them?" Marco asked, sounding surprised. Damien looked at Lena. "I told you." He said, "I used to be a strategist. I called Rossi 5 minutes before we breached the door." He walked over to Lena. She stood there, covered in dust, her wrists raw, her dress torn. She looked like a survivor. "Damien," she breathed. He pulled her into his arms. The contact was desperate. Damien buried his face in her neck, breathing in the scent of her, verifying that she was alive, warm, and real. His arms wrapped around her so tightly it almost hurt, but Lena clung back just as hard. "I thought I lost you," Damien whispered, his voice breaking. "I thought I was too late. You came." Lena sobbed against his chest. "You came for me." Damien pulled back slightly, pressing his forehead against hers. He closed his eyes, his hands cupping her face, his thumbs wiping away the tears and the grime. "Always," he said, "I will always come for you." Blue and red lights began to flash through the high windows, painting the warehouse in a chaotic strobe. The police were outside. The legal nightmare was just beginning. But as Damien held Lena in the center of the wreckage, surrounded by the ruins of his enemies, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He had won the only war that mattered. The red and blue lights of the police cruisers painted the interior of the warehouse in a chaotic, strobing rhythm. The air was thick with the smell of cordite, dust, and the sharp, metallic tang of blood. Lena Carter stood near the open bay doors, a blanket draped over her shoulders by a paramedic, watching the end of a nightmare that had lasted for years. 2 officers marched Eric Hale toward the back of a patrol car. His hands were cuffed behind his back, his face bruised and swollen from the impact with the concrete floor. He did not look like the monster who had haunted her dreams for so long. He looked small. He looked pathetic. As the officer pushed his head down to guide him into the vehicle, Eric twisted around, his eyes locked onto Lena. There was no shouting this time, no threats, no manic laughter. He just glared, a look of pure, impotent venom. He mouthed something that might have been her name, or might have been a curse, before the door slammed shut, sealing him inside the cage of the cruiser. Lena let out a breath she felt she had been holding since the day she married him, the invisible weight that had pressed down on her chest, the constant looking over her shoulder, the flinching at loud noises. It all began to evaporate into the cold night air. He was gone. The restraining order was no longer just a piece of paper. It was a prelude to a prison sentence for kidnapping, assault, and conspiracy. She turned her gaze to the other side of the loading dock. Damien Vescari sat on the bumper of an ambulance, a paramedic wrapping a bandage around his upper arm where a bullet had grazed him. He was shirtless, his tactical vest discarded on the ground, revealing the lean, hard muscle of his torso and the sheen of sweat that still clung to his skin. He was not looking at the police or his men. He was looking at her. Standing next to him was a man in a rumpled trench coat, Detective Rossi. They were speaking in low tones. Lena watched as Damien nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement. It was the nod of a man signing a contract with the devil to save his soul. The days that followed were a blur of legal motions and headlines. The arrest of Eric Hale and the takedown of Miguel Rojas dominated the news cycle in Harborview. The information Damien provided to Detective Rossi was devastatingly accurate. The Rojas syndicate was dismantled systematically. Warehouses were raided. Accounts were frozen. The rival threat that had loomed over the city was cut off at the knees. But peace came with a heavy price tag. Damien's cooperation was not free. To secure leniency for his own men and to ensure the Rojas were buried deep enough that they could never retaliate against Lena, Damien had to bleed. He sat in interrogation rooms for hours, negotiating the terms of his surrender. He was forced to liquidate assets, close down operations that had been the backbone of his family's power for decades, and pay fines that decimated his personal fortune. The Vescari Empire did not crumble. It was voluntarily dismantled, brick by brick, by the man who had built it. 3 days after the warehouse incident, Lena visited Damien in the private wing of St. Jude's Hospital. The bullet graze had become infected, requiring a brief admission and a course of heavy antibiotics. The room was quiet and sterile, smelling of antiseptic and white linen. It was a stark contrast to the velvet and leather world of the penthouse. Damien was sitting up in bed, looking at a stack of legal documents on his lap. He looked tired. There were dark circles under his eyes, and the arrogance that usually shielded him was gone, replaced by a raw, exposed humanity. He looked up as she entered. He did not smile immediately. He watched her close the door and walk toward the bed. "They took the waterfront properties," Damien said quietly, tossing the papers onto the side table, "and the logistics company. The plea deal allows me to keep the restaurants and the real estate holdings in the North End, provided I submit to monthly audits for the next 5 years. Lena stood by the bedside, her hand resting on the metal rail. "That sounds like a heavy price." "It is," Damien admitted. He looked down at his hands. "I am not the man I was a week ago. Lena, I am not the king of Harborview anymore. I am just a man with a criminal record and a failing business portfolio who has to ask permission to leave the state." He looked up at her, and the vulnerability in his dark eyes broke her heart. "I am a half-broken king with no kingdom," he whispered. "I am terrified that you are going to look at me now, without the power and the protection, and realize that you made a mistake." Lena stared at him. She thought about the man who had walked into a warehouse alone to die for her. She thought about the man who had held her while she cried, who had respected her boundaries, who had listened to her dreams of going to college. She did not answer him with words, not yet. She kicked off her shoes. Damien watched, confusion flickering in his eyes, as Lena climbed gently onto the edge of the hospital bed. She moved carefully, mindful of his injured arm, until she was kneeling beside him. She reached out and cupped his face in her hands, her thumbs tracing the sharp line of his jaw, feeling the roughness of his stubble. "You are an idiot, Damien Vescari," she said softly. He blinked. "Excuse me." "You think I fell in love with the syndicate?" Lena asked, her voice fierce and tender. "You think I cared about the scary reputation or the army of guards?" She leaned in closer, until their foreheads were touching. "I fell in love with the man who looked at a scared waitress and decided her fear mattered. I fell in love with the man who made me feel safe when the rest of the world wanted to hurt me. I do not care about the kingdom. Damien, I just want the king." Damien let out a shuddering breath, his hands coming up to grip her waist. "You are sure? This life. It will not be glamorous. It will be hard work. People will talk. Let them talk," Lena whispered against his lips. "We will be too busy living to listen." Damien closed the distance between them. The kiss was slow, deep, and tasting of salvation. It was not the desperate, adrenaline-fueled collision of the gala or the warehouse. It was a deliberate claiming. Damien's hand moved from her waist to the back of her neck, his fingers tangling in her hair, holding her like she was the only solid thing in a shifting world. Lena melted into him, her heart beating a steady rhythm against his chest, sealing a promise that no judge or jury could ever dissolve. 8 months later, The spring air in Harborview was crisp and smelled of the ocean. On a quiet corner in the North End, a small but vibrant restaurant named The Table was glowing with golden light. It was not a grand establishment like the places Damien used to own. It was intimate, with exposed brick walls, 20 tables, and a menu that changed every week. It was also packed every single night. Lena Carter moved through the dining room with a grace that had replaced her old anxiety. She carried a bottle of red wine to a table of 4, laughing at a joke one of the customers made. She wore a simple black dress, her hair loose and waving around her shoulders. She looked radiant. She looked free. She paused by the server station to check the reservation book. It was fully booked for the next 3 weeks. She made a note to order more linens, her mind effortlessly switching between the front-of-house hospitality and the back-office accounting she had learned to master. Through the pass-through window into the kitchen, she caught a glimpse of the head chef. Damien was chopping basil with rhythmic precision. He wore a white chef's coat, the sleeves rolled up to reveal his forearms. He was focused, intense, shouting orders to his sous chef, a young man from the neighborhood named Leo, but there was no malice in his voice, only the demanding perfectionism of an artist. He looked up, sensing her gaze. For a second, the noise of the kitchen and the dining room faded. Damien winked at her. It was a quick, boyish gesture that made Lena's stomach flip just as it had the first time he looked at her. The night wound down. The last customer paid their bill and wandered out into the cool evening. The staff cleaned up, stacking chairs and wiping down surfaces, until it was just Lena and Damien left in the quiet restaurant. Damien locked the front door and flipped the sign to closed. He turned off the main overhead lights, leaving only the warm glow of the wall sconces. Lena was leaning against the bar, tallying the receipts. She felt arms wrap around her waist from behind. Damien rested his chin on her shoulder, sighing with contentment. "We did good numbers tonight," he murmured, kissing the sensitive spot just below her ear. "We did excellent numbers," Lena corrected, leaning back into him, "and the risotto was perfect. Mrs. Moretti at table 4 said it tasted like her grandmother used to make." Damien chuckled, the sound vibrating in his chest against her back. "That is the highest compliment in this neighborhood." He turned her around in his arms. The music system was still playing softly, a playlist Lena had curated, by pure chance. A slow, orchestral song began to play. It was the same waltz from the night of the charity gala. Months ago, Damien recognized it instantly. He smiled, a soft, crooked expression that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "May I have this dance?" he asked formally. Lena smiled back, looping her arms around his neck. "I believe you may." They swayed in the dim light of the empty dining room. It was not a performance this time. There were no cameras, no enemies, no agendas. There was only the creak of the floorboards and the warmth of their bodies moving in sync. Lena rested her head on his shoulder, closing her eyes. "I sent in the application today," she whispered. Damien pulled back slightly to look at her face. "For the finance program." "Yes, the university has a night program for adult learners. If I get in, I can take classes on Tuesdays and Thursdays." "You will get in," Damien said with absolute certainty. "You are the smartest person I know, and we will make it work. I can handle the floor on those nights." Lena laughed. "You? Hey, handling the customers? You will scare them away if they ask for ketchup." Damien feigned offense, his hand sliding down to rest respectfully but firmly at her hip. "I can be charming. I charmed you, didn't I? You wore me down," she teased. Damien's expression softened. His hand moved up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing over her lower lip. The atmosphere shifted from playful to something deeper, heavier. The air grew thick with a simmering passion that had only grown stronger with time. "I love you, Lena," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I love you too," she answered. He kissed her then. It was a soft exploration, his lips moving over hers with a reverence that made her knees weak. He tasted of wine and basil, his fingers threaded into her hair, gently tilting her head back to deepen the angle. Lena pressed her body against his, Feeling the solid, reassuring strength of him, there was desire there, undeniably hot and urgent, but it was grounded in a profound sense of safety. They were partners. They were survivors. Damien pulled away slowly, his forehead resting against hers. "Let's go upstairs," he whispered. They locked the back office and walked hand in hand up the stairs to the apartment above the restaurant. It was not a fortress anymore. It was a home. Later, the night air was cool on the rooftop terrace. They sat on a small outdoor sofa, wrapped together in a thick wool blanket, looking out over the sleeping city of Harborview. The skyline twinkled in the distance. But down here, in the narrow streets of the North End, it was quiet. Lena rested her head on Damien's chest, listening to his heartbeat. It was steady, calm. "Do you remember the first night?" she asked softly. "At the club?" Damien tightened his arm around her. "I remember every second of it." Lena looked at his hand, tracing the veins on the back of it. "I was so scared. I thought my life was over. I thought there was no way out." Damien was silent for a moment. He reached into the back pocket of his jeans and pulled out his leather wallet. It was worn and scuffed, a relic from his old life. He opened it and pulled out a small, folded square of white paper. It was creased and soft from being handled 1,000 times. Lena sat up, surprised. "You kept it?" Damien nodded. He unfolded the cocktail napkin carefully. The ink was slightly faded, the handwriting jagged and terrified. He read it aloud, his voice thick with the memory of that night. "My ex is here. Please don't let him hurt me tonight." He looked at the words for a long moment, then looked at Lena. "I kept it to remind myself," Damien said quietly. "To remind myself that power is not about controlling a city or frightening your enemies. It is about the ability to answer a plea like this." He folded the napkin and placed it gently on the table between them, anchoring it with his hand. "I cannot promise you that the world will never hurt you again." "Lena," he said, his eyes locking onto hers with intense sincerity. "Life is messy. There will be bad days. There will be struggles. I cannot stop the rain from falling." He took her hand, interlacing his fingers with hers, palm to palm, a perfect fit. "But I promise you this," he vowed. "I will spend the rest of my life standing between you and the storm. As long as I have breath in my body, you will never have to write a note like that again." Lena looked at him, tears of happiness pricking her eyes. She saw the scars on his hands, the gray hairs starting to show at his temples, the lines of worry on his face. He was not a perfect man. He was flawed, complicated, and carried a heavy past, but he was hers. "I know," she whispered. She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. Damien wrapped the blanket tighter around them both, shielding them from the chill. They sat there in the silence, two people who had walked through fire and come out the other side, watching the moon rise over the city that was no longer their battlefield, but their home. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed the journey of Lena and Damien as much as I enjoyed bringing it to life for you. It was a roller coaster of emotions, danger and romance, and I am so grateful you stayed with us until the very end. I would love to hear from you in the comments section below. Please let me know where you are listening from. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel around the world. Did you like the ending? What was your favorite part of their journey? Share your thoughts in English, as I love reading your feedback. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more passionate, thrilling tales like this one, please make sure to subscribe to the Mafia Romance Stories channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thank you again for your support. Until next time, stay safe and keep believing in love.